We're going to get started. This is session 8371. The title is Securing Government Virtual Environments, and my name is Stan Novinsky. I'm a senior integration engineer from Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, and I submitted this session with the help of Rob for the purpose of trying to find a set of standard procedures that we can certify and accredit a DoD site. So with that, we'll take a look at the agenda. This is real quick. Go through some session logistics. Then we'll have an introduction of our panel members. Then we're going to have a short presentation that actually Rob's going to give in place of Lieutenant Colonel Bourne, who couldn't be here, on how he was able to take a virtualized system out to the field, Iraq, which was a pretty neat thing. And then we'll have one of our other panelists, Keith. We'll talk about his data center virtualization project. And then we're going to open it up to panel questions, which really, we want you people, the audience, to submit the questions. I know there's a lot of questions. I can see the audience is rather large. And either we have the same problem, is there a certain way to certify a government installation for accreditation, or you're here for the free books that we'll be giving out. If you don't have a ticket, we're taking the tickets. I think they're in the back in a bowl. We're going to draw two books. One is by Eric Siebert. He was donating a book for us, a very good book called Maximum vSphere. And the second one is VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security by one of our panelists. We call him Texi Will. You should probably know him by that. That's Edward. Okay, and we'll have the drawing at the end. Okay, make sure you have your business cards, dropped in the bowl in the back. Now, this was kind of a funny thing. I left this in from my slide preparation and got to VMware, and they said, we're not doing them anymore. Remember, we used to walk in and get handed the little papers, and fill these out. Now everything's going to be done online. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. I haven't had time to do any online, so we'll see if they revert back to the paper way of doing things next year in Vegas. Okay. We all have heard of ESX35 vSphere and now 4.1. A show of hands. Who's running ESX35? Okay. Anybody running 4.0? All right, look at this. How about 4.1? It's kind of new. That's good. That's pretty good. Now, how about this? Who's running 4.1? Or actually, let's start this. Who's running 3.5 in a DoD environment certified ATO? What? 4? Okay, let's jump up. This ought to be interesting. How about vSphere 4? Anybody running vSphere 4 certified with an ATO? Okay, that's pretty good. How about 4.1? 3? Okay. All right, now here's why we're having today's panel session. I start working on looking at a process to accredit a site or a couple sites that we're interested in moving to virtualization. And I started about a year ago. I contacted Rob, I contacted Michael, Edward. So we're trying to get some information on where are those steps. I know there's an ESX35 STIG out of DISA. I think it's dated 2008 maybe. I'm still waiting on the vSphere STIG, which supposedly was coming out last January. I still haven't seen it. I know we have the vSphere hardening guide, which is a good document to follow, but there's no set of one procedures. So the question becomes, how do you find, is there a common ground between all these site systems, the government, the security, DISA? Is there going to be a way that we can find one set of documents that we can use? Okay, what about the DAA's process? Is that something that's going to have to be a standard set of procedures to accredit a system? Okay. Do we have any DAAs in the audience? I'd like to talk to him at some point if possible after. We'll sneak off to the corner. Yeah, free book. Okay, so today we're going to answer some of these questions. I got some pretty good fellows up here. Got a good group of panel participants that's going to help us answer some of these questions. And with that, I'm going to turn over the moderation duties to Rob, and I'm going to sit on the panel.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody. And we were kind of talking about this. We kind of went back and forth on who should moderate this, who shouldn't, who should kind of give the introduction. It's always a challenge there. But I think these guys are going to have a whole lot better insight than I will. And I think you guys have heard enough from the vendor. It's much better to hear from other customers as well as kind of industry experts here. So I think that was kind of the reason that I'm going to be I'm going to be moderating this as opposed to actually answering the questions right now. But again, real quick introduction of myself. My name is Rob Randall. I'm a staff security specialist here at VMware. So basically everything I do is with security. I'm actually part of our federal team though, although I end up covering pretty much everything as well. So whether it be PCI, whether it be commercial, but federal is obviously a real big focus, and especially when we talk about security, that's always a key area because we got some real reasons, obviously, to secure these environments. It's not just data anymore. We're talking about lives at stake here, so security is obviously very, very important. So real quick, we're going to kind of go through and introduce everybody here. So first one I'm going to introduce is Michael Berman. Michael is CTO over at Catbird Solutions, so one of our partners in the area of virtualized security and a virtualized security appliance. I'll let him kind of go into detail on the product itself at some point, or really maybe afterwards. But real key industry expert, really focusing in on the government sector, and he's got some interesting stuff that he can talk about, kind of some places he's in, and some of the projects. From a high level, at least, that we can talk about. Ed Haletke, many of you probably know him again as TechSci Will on the communities, forums, podcasts, all over the place. He's more of an industry expert for us as opposed to federal specific or government specific, but he's got obviously some great insight on just general virtualization security concepts and products and best practices and all of that. So he hosts a podcast, and I think what is it, tomorrow at 11:30? You said up in the Bloggers Lounge in the booth there. He's actually going to be doing his virtualization security podcast live in the booth there. So please come if you can and surround the booth or listen at least. And then we have Keith. Keith is I'm sorry. iAssure, from iAssure. So Keith is out there in the field implementing, deploying, contractor out there working with our federal customers. So he's got some really great experiences that he can talk about. So we're going to go ahead and jump in then. Who's not here is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Bourne. He was supposed to be here with us. He, again, had a project out. He's been working with VMware. Unfortunately, the company that he was with or the group that he was with got acquired, and it was kind of back and forth, so he just wasn't able to make it out for this year, and we were really disappointed about that because he was going to give us some real good background on some of the work that he'd done in the IA side of things as far as getting ATOs and actually putting some stuff out in the field for our troops. So here's kind of a quick kind of rundown of kind of what he's done, what he did here, but it was an Exchange server environment in particular, and again, what they were dealing with is very unstable. And there was not a lot of time, obviously, to allow for patching, maintenance, and those types of things. So what he went to, actually, interestingly, is he leveraged virtualization from the availability perspective. So he went to a one-to-one environment. That was it wasn't about consolidation for him, mainly from a liability standpoint as well as from a continuity of operations. So it's interesting, we always talk about let's get better and better consolidation ratios. Let's go to the cloud, for the cost benefits and savings. But there's so much more to that. To me, again, when I talk to folks about it anymore, to me, the other benefits far outweigh even the consolidation benefits. It's not just about consolidation anymore. Virtualization can provide so much more. So, again, a quick look at kind of what he did. Again, 2 deployable server rooms. It looks like he had a NIPR and SIPR environment, so he was able to put this in classified environments. And again, 50 servers. Network, again, basically unmanaged, and basically the whole goal here was, unless it can be virtualized, this way it can move around and get that availability. So if it can't be virtualized, it gets out of the data center, and that was kind of the goal there. He wanted everything virtualized. And again, it wasn't about consolidation, but it was more about the reliability aspects and everything. So he can obviously give this, but he did have full DIACAP accreditation. And again, he deployed one of these to Korea in February 2009, and again, I believe he also had this, out in Iraq back in 2007. So he's got some real great experience in this area, so unfortunately it was kind of disappointing that he couldn't be there with us. So we're going to head it over to Keith. Keith is going to do a quick kind of talk about kind of what his experience here is and kind of what he's done. Do you want to come up here, Keith, or you just want to kind of sit down with the mic, and I can change your slides for you?
How's everybody doing this morning? Make sure y'all can hear me. I don't know how close to get this or how far away, so forgive me up front. My name is Keith Strange, and I did some work with SPAWARE New Orleans and SPAWARE San Diego. Basically, if you guys recall a little storm called Katrina, it came through New Orleans and wiped out the Navy's data center there, and they got the big idea to rebuild everything virtual. And so that's where VMware came in, that's where I came in, and we basically built an NMCI EDMZ data center there. Got the enclave accredited, got all that set up, got the package submitted, and then we began the ESX STIG, which was the next interesting road we crossed. Because back then, DISA didn't have a STIG yet. It was run the Unix SRR, submit those results, and so we sat down and scripted the STIG process for ESX so that we could repeat it, and so that when you patched, that's another thing you guys will come across. When you run a STIG and you secure a Unix or Linux system, and then you run a kernel patch, or you run some kind of patch on the system, you upgrade from 3.1 to 3.5, you find that it wipes out 80% of your STIG. It changes your file permissions, replaces files you already had secured. So what we wanted to do was come up with a repeatable process, and I sure did that. And if you see the 25 Navy applications accredited, that's a 2-year period. 25 full 3-year ATOs in 2 years. And for those of you guys that know, that's a lot of ATOs. 3 guys did that. 3 guys wrote all the packages, submitted all the packages, and the key was to make it a repeatable process that we could then build on the other sites, and we've done that. It's a repeatable process. If you guys have ever done a virtualization assessment for VMware, and you get that document with the highlighted yellow areas you have to replace, same process. You come to a new site, you do your scans, you do your STIGs, then you have a templated document you fill out and submit up to the DAA and DISA for approval and for the ATO process. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. Now for New Orleans, for the classified side, so we did the NIPR part first. Everybody's familiar with NIPR. And so once we had that process down, we did the SIPR process second. And we had the entire enclave built, the DIACAP package submitted, and done in less than 30 days because of the virtual environment. Once you have a STIG 2003 image, what do you build all your machines off of? That STIG'd image. You don't have to go STIG 50 servers now if you build 50 servers. You STIG the one image, you clone it or build it from a template, and then all of your systems are baseline STIG. Now, if it's going to, obviously you put a web server on there, you have to apply the web STIG. Or if it's a database server, you have to change it a little bit. Or you create those pre-built images for web, for database. The virtual environment does that for you. We decreased the time, the approval time, by 75%. So it went from almost a year down to 3 months to get an IATO or ATO for a particular application. The enterprise IA services that we built into the virtual environment are right there, HBSS, SCIVy, SCREE, Audit, all pre-configured, pre-built on an appliance, can be deployed in a matter of a couple of hours, and you meet 85% of those 8,500 standards that you have to meet for the DIACAP process. And that's pretty much my spiel on the 2 slides. If you go to, I think I have one more to go through. These are some of the other sites we're involved in, and they're not necessarily virtualized yet. We're trying to get them there. But iAssure also does packages and ATOs for all of these clients here as well. And I think I have one more. All right. So anybody that's done STIGing, who's done a STIG here? Raise your hand. Yeah, so you know, right? Just the VM, the ESX STIG alone is 400 and something pages of information to go through. So the key is to make that a repeatable process. And so we created a script. I can harden an ESX server about 95% in 8 minutes. It takes 8 minutes to run the script and make all the changes. The same thing for Windows OS is about 18 minutes now. The key is to make that a repeatable process, to make it something that you can do and redo, because then on an ESX server, we did our upgrade from 3.5 to 4.0. And we, as we upgraded the ESX servers, we had to have that new script ready to run, because, by the way, guys, the 3.5 script didn't work so well on 4.0, right? So we had to redo that, but we had it ready so that you could reapply all the security settings, because obviously once you upgrade, you got to rescan and redo everything to make sure that you upgrade your documentation and your DAA is a big part of that. When you asked if there was any DAAs in the room, your DAA, in the end of all this, no matter how much documentation we have, no matter how much work we do, the DAA has to accept some risk. And that's the key, is you have to document that and present that to the DAA in a way that he's going to be accepting that risk. ESXi is the exact same way, because right now there's not a specific ESXi STIG out there. It's considered an appliance, right? But we all know that underneath that appliance is BusyBox Linux, right? At some point, DISA is going to have a specific STIG for ESXi, and I think it may catch some people by surprise. One of the problems is SSH, right? SSH is disabled on ESXi by default. However, you can't scan it if SSH is disabled. All of your scanning tools require SSH, right? If you're going to scan a Unix or Linux box, you got it. So you have to take a secure system and make it inherently less secure by turning on SSH so they can scan it. So there's some thought changing and some process change that has to happen at DISA as well, because if I enable all these services they have to have, I'm inherently less secure than I am if I don't enable them. And I have one more, I think. All right. So the last one I'm going to go over real quick is just the automation part. ESX allows me to automate and repeat a process in a very small amount of time. If my image I'm building from is already secured, if I have a web pre-stigged image that I can clone a box from in a matter of a couple minutes, and then allow the security team to scan it, have that all done so that I can deploy a secure web server in minutes instead of hours or days or weeks, that is where the key of where we're trying to get to. And my experience with the DoD and the Navy DAA here would be different from somebody from, if you were across the street and it was a different DAA, it might be a different package you have to submit. And I think that's what he was alluding to, Stan, is that we have to have some standardization, and hopefully that's coming from DISA, DAA to DAA, because even a different site. San Diego was different than New Orleans. Our COOP site is San Diego. They can COOP the whole environment in 4 hours. And they do that, but our packages we had to submit for San Diego, all of our stuff we had to do for San Diego were different than what we had to do for New Orleans. But automating that process with VMware saved us an immense amount of time. And we can build out a whole enclave in a matter of a few weeks, have the package submitted, have it ready to go. Thank you, guys.
Cool. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get into the panel discussion, although I do want to give, Michael or Edward, do you guys want to have an opening statement? You want to kind of talk about anything first, or you just want to be fielding questions? I do know, okay. Go for it, Michael.
So Catbird is working in the same area to do that next step from speeding up the process of performing the security checks and getting ATO to making it continuous. So what we've discovered through our work with VMware and the work with the VMware APIs, that we can now do something that wasn't really possible before in terms of continuous assurance. So I just want to bring that up. There's another level of advantage here to virtualization, and we found in working with our customers in U.S. Federal, getting them through moderate to high type certifications, that extra level of assurance was very good, right, for the CISOs involved. They got added security, added protection, and better metrics than they've been able to get before.
I'm Edward Tledke, and actually part of what I've done in the past, and actually what I continue to do, is I work with the standards bodies. So I've actually talked to CIS, I've talked to VMware, I've talked to DISA. I get all the stuff beforehand and kind of review it. And quite frankly, the DISA STIG from 3.5 still applies to 4 and 4.1. So there's some things that need to change, but it's a good STIG. It's a good standard. But it needs to expand even further. The scope of it is a little narrow. And that's the advice I've given to everybody. And that's my involvement in this, is to review all this stuff. and try to see where it fits into what I know about virtualization and cloud security today.
Cool. All right, thanks, guys. So, okay, here's the deal. I've got a whole list of questions here. I don't want to use any of them. I want you guys to come up with the questions. So please, raise your hand. We should have some mics going around the room to help everybody hear your questions. So she's going to grab them right now. So I want some hands raised so we can get some questions. So, sir, okay, right up here. Why don't you get your hand? Why don't you stand up so she can see where you are? I want to do as little as possible during this presentation, so let everybody else do the work. I got enough to do.
Okay, my question is mostly around multi-tenancy.
Okay.
We're a DoD defense contractor, multiple foreign nationals on site, working together to develop product for the military. The question is, with the capabilities of distributed switches and things like that in VMware, we'd like to be able to go to logical, accepted DoD separation as opposed to physical. And most of the default fallbacks we end up going with is physical separation of networking and things like that. But, obviously that's not cost effective and it's not easy to manage. And so what's the direction the government's going in allowing us to take advantage of logical separation as opposed to physical and then allow us to have that approved?
Perfect. Okay, one question off the list here that I had. So who wants to take that one?
What happened with us? Okay. We were required to do physical. I mean, I think they're becoming more accepting of logical. I'm doing an IRS project as well, and there's going to be logical separation there. But initially, they were very adamant about physical separation. So each vSwitch had to have its own connections, and those, the out-of-band internal network could not in any way, shape, or form be connected to the production, whatever zone it was, whether it was production private zone or production public or whatever. So it requires a lot of Ethernet. I agree. I understand what you're saying, but and the sad part is it's going to depend on your local DAA, like we were saying. Who's going to accept that risk? If they understand the logical separation, if they understand how that works, then you're ahead of the game. But if you're dealing with somebody who doesn't get VMware, doesn't get the logical separation, then I'm afraid you're kind of stuck with hard separation. It's
about education, about kind of getting the DAAs up to speed. I think that's a big challenge,
some of them
right?
are getting there. Some of them are. I mean,
Good.
And if you work with one on a repetitive basis, they get better, right? And then they get relocated, but I mean, or promoted, or moved on because they've been doing so many good ATO packages, right? So I mean, the fact of the matter is there's no hard answer right now. I mean, it's going to depend on where you're at. And I know that makes designing it an absolute nightmare. I mean,
as a follow-up to that, though, when talking about that, when I talk to a lot of folks, it's about classification levels, right? Whether you're top secret, secret, unclassified. What about within those classification levels? Because I talk to a lot of customers, they have the different classification levels, and they're going to do that separate physically right now until we get to an accepted MLS type environment. But what about within those classification levels when you have the different need to knows? Have you guys run into that at all? Have you seen anything like that, Michael?
Yeah, I've been working with DISA and people with the Army Signal Corps out of Monmouth and now Aberdeen, and another federal agency where they are talking about multiple compartments at a single classification level. So they're highly, they want secure multi-tenancy where they have multiple communities of interest, potentially representing different components of the agency, all in the same shared fabric. And now with the APIs that we have with VMware, I'm fully on board with that personally as a security professional. I believe it is provable that you can fence off those compartments, audit the traffic between VMs, in fact have a higher assurance of auditing through the hypervisor layer than we had in the physical layers previously. So I'm all for it. I think there's a huge management advantage, a huge security advantage, and education is key. I mean, we absolutely have to work with the CISOs and the DAAs involved to explain how the logical separation works and why it's effective. And actually, at the end of the day, you're able to demonstrate why it's more effective, really, than VLANing or other methods of segmentation.
Cool. Anybody else? There we go.
Yeah, follow up to that question on the network separation.
Well,
You also have to do physical host separation?
no.
You are allowed to
Like with like.
Here, get the mic. Take the mic.
Like with like. No, I mean, if there's different security, that did require physical separation. So what the Navy did to solve that was they put a blade chassis in each of the 8 zones, right? So each of the zones, and there's, in an EDMZ for the Navy, there's prod private, production public, which is prod, then dev priv, dev public, all those zones are physically separated in a Navy EDMZ, which, I don't know how many Navy folks are in here. I'm going to make them mad here, which doesn't make any sense, because if you look at a Navy EDMZ, you have 6,500 Cisco switches with one blade in them, right, that are supporting a zone that has maybe 6 connections, right? But they literally have 8. Cisco probably loved the idea, but from a cost standpoint, to stand one of those up, it's got to be astronomical. I mean, you can't. It's not effective. But I think if we did that same layout 2.5 years later now, today, it would be different, and we wouldn't have to have those. Even if it came down to physically separate switch blades in the same chassis, I think we could get away with not having a hardware separation to that degree. And I think cost is going to drive that as well, right? I mean, if you can show them a way to do it that cost 1/8 of what it was going to cost to do it the other way, I think that's a win for them as well. So.
Very good. All right. More questions from the crowd. I saw other hands kind of pop up before there. There's one.
This question might be more focused towards the AAs, but regarding the STIG on ESX and ESXi, do you expect either an addendum to be passed for the ESX STIG, or were you thinking that there was going to be a separate STIG for ESXi itself?
I've been working this issue since, I guess, last October. Contacted this FSO, contacted some other people at DISA. They had a process in place where they were writing an update STIG for vSphere. They said it would be out in January. So far, I haven't seen it. What they told me was, I don't know if Rob can collaborate this, but it was going back to VMware for review.
Right.
And then VMware would review it and send it back to DISA. So somewhere in between, we were hoping that it would be out by now. That it would be current. But from what I know, there will be a STIG released, and I'm hoping this year for vSphere.
Yeah, there will be a specific vSphere STIG. I can't give you a time frame. I don't know. But what I can say is if you look at our hardening guide, the new vSphere hardening guide, or relatively new anymore, but the vSphere hardening guide, the way it's kind of structured, and there's a section in there for vCenter, for example. There's a section in there for ESX. There's also a section in there for the console operating system. That console operating system section won't apply to ESXi. So maybe there'll be a line in there that says, if you're running ESXi, disregard this section. Yeah, our hardening guide, yeah. So we've got that on our website. So that's probably what you'll see in general from the STIG. So I don't know if it'll be an addendum per se, just here, this is ESXi specific, because frankly, a lot of the stuff that you do for ESX, you'll also do for ESXi. The difference is, for ESX, you also have to do the whole console operating system. For ESXi, you've got some of the lockdown mode features and the tech support mode, that shell in there. So there's some things that you'll want to do to lock that down in those environments. So those will be some additional things, maybe just specific to ESXi. So maybe there'll be like an ESXi kind of section within the document.
Does that necessitate a VMA STIG?
Sorry?
A VMA STIG?
A VMA STIG? That I wouldn't expect anytime soon. The VMA is essentially, frankly, just a Red Hat box. Right? I mean, it's essentially it's just a Linux box. So that, to me, would be a Linux STIG that you would apply to VMA. It's just an appliance at that point. It's not anything. There's no hypervisor on it. It's nothing special about it other than it's a method to manage from. Frankly, you can build your own VMA with our components. You guys, go for it, please.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, just so everybody understands, when we talk about ESX STIG and ESXi and all that, you understand if you look at the bottom of those STIGs, it says C Unix STIG as well. So when you're doing an ESX STIG, it's not just an ESX STIG. You first have to have applied all the Unix STIG to that console operating system, then the additional ESX task as well. So it's an ugly jungle in there, and you got to watch the rotation, because at the bottom of the documents it will refer to any other STIGs that apply. It's just, I mean, it can get, you first have to have run the Unix SRR scripts on the console operating system and done all those findings, and then any ESX specific, and then there's a VM STIG and a virtual center STIG, and all those have to be done in concert. So,
on top of that, you mentioned ESXi specifically. There is, with 4.1, there's actually a lot more defense in depth. So a lot more of that STIG actually applies to it these days. Before, you couldn't do anything.
Right.
Now you actually still have to think about hardening, because they've actually pulled in a lot more PAM modules to support the AD integration, PAM access, and all that. So yeah, it does apply. And you got to think about it like that. So,
yeah, I'm not sure it fully applies.
No,
but
like half. It's like half of it goes away, but you know what?
Right.
Some of it all does apply.
Exactly.
And right now, no one's made that determination of what actually applies.
depends on what services you enable.
Well, there's yeah, exactly.
Can any of you speak as to encryption in virtual environments?
Oh, I can speak to encryption in virtual environments.
Please do.
It depends on what you want to encrypt. If you encrypt with inside the VM, today, an administrator could grab your keys at any time, which means that whoever that admin is in the government...
And you're talking about the vSphere admin.
vSphere admin. vSphere admin only. The guy that has the low level underneath the keys to the kingdom. In the government area, whatever classification is on that box, it could be secret, top secret, and things above that, that guy has to have the top one. He can't be the guy. He can't be the secret guy if there's a top and secret on there. It has to be everybody. The guy that has the highest level. He has to be the admin, because literally he can see everything. And if you encrypt in the VM, all he's done, you can drop that memory image, and he's just changed the haystack size to be really, really small. So yeah, the keys are there. If you're going to encrypt, don't encrypt in the VM right now. Put your data in there encrypted.
Well, don't do it in the VM if you're trying to protect it from privilege abuse.
Yeah.
Right. There's reasons to encrypt in the VM that are not being addressed by this commentary, but if you're trying to do least privilege or protect against escalation of privilege or abuse of privilege, you want to put your encryption somewhere else in the fabric.
Yes.
Where it's not accessible through hypervisor privilege. Right, but there's still good reasons to encrypt inside a VM.
Absolutely. I'm thinking that if you're going to encrypt a disk, that's a totally different story. Wait for the hypervisor to actually do it for you.
All right. Back row here.
To get back to the STIG thing, sorry to jump back.
No, it's all good.
And
Keep
I
going.
wish DISA was here. I wish there was a rep here from DISA.
They may be. They're probably hiding.
Yeah, just like the DAA.
Yeah, we didn't ask about that, right?
Yeah. Who's here from DISA?
I guess my next package is not going to make it through, right?
Yeah, I'm hiding my badge, but what you guys have obviously been on part of these working groups for the STIGs. Where does the influence come from as far as with the category, the threat category of these things? I was part of the working group for the original ESX STIG, spent hours of personal time going through, documenting, making cases for why something should be done or shouldn't be done, and went through, did all the phone conferences and all that, and that STIG passed exactly the way that it came out and was released to the working group community. So that's, as an administrator, there's things in there that's like, okay, they would identify something as a Cat 1, but, and let me tell you, go to a DAA with a Cat 1 and say, hey, this is how we're mitigating it. It really should be a system engineer decision on this, all of my defense in depth, but it's like they look at that and go, it's a Cat 1. You better have something really compelling to make them allow you to do it.
Right.
So any input or feedback on that? I mean,
on who's actually making those decisions?
Well, I mean, ultimately, DIS is making the decisions.
Right.
But, the vendor community used to have the old guard with DISA, right? You had the guys that grew up with computing, with the evolution of the computers and all of that. Those guys have rolled off. You've lost that continuity of knowledge. And now a lot of them are relatively fresh out of college. You got these people with computer engineering degrees that have limited operational experience. and they're just rubber stamping. Vendor recommends this. I'm not putting my butt on the line. Rubber stamp right through, and it almost makes the whole working group community, kind of a moot point.
Right.
So,
well,
and I mean, Rob, you'd probably be one of the ones that best talk about that.
Right.
Working in VMware.
You have something, Stan, real quick, and I'll address what I know.
Yeah, Rob would be the one. From what I've spoken to with this, and I hope they're not here, but they said basically VMware was following a set of guidelines that they would use and certify. They weren't having working groups, or nobody in that office was doing any work on the STIG. They were just going to review it and hand it off. Actually have VMware be the ones to put down what would be in the STIG itself, right. And they would check off or okay it.
Yeah. It's kind of a combination now, is where it is. I mean, obviously DISA does a lot of the work, or they did a lot of the work in the previous one. Now it's kind of coming back to where they want the vendor to write it, because we know our products, right? As far as the categorization of what's critical or not, we can kind of give our suggestions there, but it's going to go to DISA, it's going to go to the NSA. I mean, there's a number of bodies in there that are actually approving this. So it's not just DISA in a vacuum. NIST isn't involved in this now. They've got kind of a joint group working together on these different kind of checklists. There's some folks here, I won't point anybody out at this point, but that know about this process. But basically, the point is it is a joint process. I don't know personally about the working group, so I can't answer that, or kind of what they did with the feedback they got from that.
But the overall process, you see that as improving down the line to where
I do
more intelligent decision making on what the security posture is?
Absolutely. That's the whole goal here, right? I mean, that's the whole goal, and it's, again, it's not just going to be done in a vacuum, is the point. So, the vendor kind of puts together the guidance, but then it goes back into the different groups within the government to actually give the final okay on it. And maybe they'll change something, maybe they won't. I don't know about a working group, other than when we put out our hardening guidelines, we put that out for public comment as well, and we got a lot of feedback, and we took that feedback and integrated that, and we did make a lot of changes actually based on the feedback that we got. So, if anything, at least that's where the feedback could have come from. And again, that wasn't just federal; that was that was also public sector as well. So
that's cool. Like I said, I'm not attached to the whole working group concept. It was
right.
just putting in all the time. And I mean, the more involvement that they get from multiple organizations, and they start to pull that level of knowledge together, it make it a lot easier to design some of these systems to do the things that they want them to do.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. And go ahead.
There are always going to be Cat 1s that shouldn't be Cat 1s, though. I mean, that's.
Well, roger that.
I mean, and it comes politically too. I mean, DISA has a rough job on both sides because
Absolutely.
they're also forced to use certain applications. I mean, let's look at the big push for HBSS, right? I mean, no HBSS. I mean, it's Cat 1. I mean, now it's a Cat 1. So if you haven't deployed HBSS, I mean, they could shut your network down. I mean, so there are always going to be political pieces of the pie or applications that they're forced to push down that are going to make some of those Cat 1s, So, I mean, you just deploy HBSS, right? It's a snap, and then that Cat 1's gone, right? So, I know it's not a snap.
I think the point is that the right people are working on it. We've got some really sharp people in the government working on kind of coordinating all of this with the different agencies, with the different groups to get the proper approvals and to hopefully, rank things properly.
Well, not only that, they're going to send out the STIG to everybody anyways. We all commented on it. And then when the last STIG came out, I got a call, or I got a call to discuss my findings on it. So, and they made the changes. It's going to come back out to the public or to the government and the public and industry analysts and experts. We're all going to comment on it and say, hey, that really shouldn't be that level. It should be this. But it's all about perceived risk. What is the perceived risk? Well, that's how you get a category level.
Well, right, but that's what you were also talking about, having some type of standardizations with DAAs, and it's a matter of what is their risk adversement. and you have one guy across the street that has one level of risk adversement, and then same branch, Navy, Marines, whatever, and then across the street, they have a different level of risk adversement, and I can appreciate that.
Well, that's why
the process seemed rather broke the last time I was involved with it.
That's one of the things what I liked about the NIST
SP853 series and 53A is that they are trying to embody a set of auditing standards as well, so there's more uniformity across how a system is audited. And going back to Edward's perception of risk, I used to work, red team pen testing, and we would take a hardened system and crack it, right? And that'd be one way to get it a little bit harder. And so sometimes the perception of risk is skewed, right? We all know it's a low likelihood attack, right? But if a red team cracked the system because of that misconfiguration, sometimes it gets elevated, even though it's a low likelihood attack. So a lot does get changed in a subjective way, and it's hard to feel good about that. But I think there's a very sincere effort to get it right.
Do we have other questions?
The discussion about hardening has been great, and certainly that's one aspect of security, but I want to go back to a comment made earlier about how you have faith in the logical assurances that are starting to crop up in the vSphere infrastructure. And talking about mitigation and response after the fact, especially in the heinous event of a hypervisor escalation, privilege escalation, how are you addressing the risk mitigation of the broader contamination possibility, right? You're starting to put a lot of systems together on the same physical box. And the old physical separation, one of the things you do is you disconnect it from the network, right? You isolate that device. And while you can do a logical isolation, you may be affecting more than just one system. Have any of you started to address that?
Kind of an incident response plan, right?
Yeah, a response plan. I mean, because, for some of the DAAs are looking at that kind of stuff. And curious if any of you have started to address those issues, because it's a different response type for virtualized systems, logical separation than physical.
Well, I'm going to cover why I think some of the logical separation is fine, and I'll let Michael talk about incident response. The logical separation, when you're talking about networking, their risk is there going to be a layer 2 attack, is there a layer 3 attack, and so forth. Within the virtual switches, layer 2 attacks are actually almost impossible.
I'll say they're infeasible.
Infeasible.
Very, very difficult.
Very, very difficult because the major layer 2 attacks are against chunks of memory that don't exist, CAM tables and switches. They're against configuration changes. Well, a lot of these switches, there are no configurations, like 3 buttons here and there. And the dials have been reduced. But the other thing is that they are authoritative switches. They know exactly what is on them. They don't learn. They know. It's because they can be that authoritative, I can trust that switch a whole lot more. And that's from a logical perspective, absolutely. And then you mentioned the fact that, hey, you used to just disconnect it to get it off the network. Well, you can still do that. At a VM by VM level, at a VNIC by VNIC level, I can just pull its plug and say, sorry, you're no longer connected. So those things still exist in the virtual world. But my level of trust of a layer 2 virtual switch is actually a lot higher than my trust of my physical switches.
Well, so that addresses layer 2 and layer 3 attacks. But what about higher level attacks that result in hypervisor
Those are going to be based on the virtualized firewalls that you put in place that handle layer 4, 5 through 7, and also what's on the VM itself.
Yeah. Right. So some are suggesting that just changes the type of risks that you face. Right. Now we depend on those devices as opposed to what we've done with our physical firewalls and stuff. And is the response plan different because now they're all on one physical box, even if there's a logical separation?
Here's response.
We've put together an incident response plan that we think is effective in many scenarios. I just want to add to this response just briefly. If you're able to assure layer 2 and layer 3 isolation, then even if there is a successful layer 4 through 7 attack, it'll still remain within the isolated compartment or enclave. So in terms of mixed compartments on a single host, right, the switch isolation and the infeasibility of jumping switches is very important here. The attack I worry about that bridges enclaves or compartments is the layer 0 attack, right? The quasi-mythical, I'll say in this room, VM escape, right, where the hypervisor is compromised from a malicious VM. That's one of the risks that keeps me awake at night. But to talk about incident response, what we've discovered is that virtual machine mobility is really useful, right? You can take really, we call it two different approaches, and I have kind of war-gamed in the podcast a couple different times, where you take the misbehaving VM, and as part of your incident response plan, you vMotion it to your incident response host, right? Which already has pre-positioned technology or applications for forensic capture of packets, for forensic memory inspection. I mean, think about what you can do through the hypervisor now. So you can do all kinds of things on that forensically prepared incident response host that you wouldn't attempt to do in production because of impact to other production systems. Conversely, you could take the unaffected machines, move them away from the compromised VM, and inspect it in place on the host it's currently residing on if you prefer. And I think there's pros and cons for both approaches. There's a legalistic attack if you move the machine off to a different host, but if you're just working from a security point of view, I would prefer to just move it over.
So when you say legalistic, you mean the chain of evidence issues?
Yeah, if you move it, there may be a chain of evidence issue. I think you can deal with it, but that's one expert's opinion. There's always plenty of experts.
Yeah. And I'd say with some of the new technology that's out there today, and again, we can isolate even if you don't move it. And you can isolate and leave those channels open, be able to inspect that traffic and without moving it. And frankly, I think in many ways a much more effective and faster way. Again, I'm not going to – my last session talked about that. But the point being is that there are ways to kind of leverage the technologies to even isolate in place.
Yeah, you can. I'm just a fan of moving it to a pre-configured host.
Yeah,
because you can have that big SAN for dumping all the packets and
Thank you, gentlemen.
The other thing you need to worry about is that none of this has gone to the court of law yet. Anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, forensic capture is, I'm talking vMotion as a forensic tool.
Right.
So there's no precedent for it, so a lot of the incident response people are going to be a little bit scared of it.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of big chain of evidence and forensic issues there with the
But in my experience, the lack of precedent is not the issue. It's when a precedent gets set that prevents you from doing what you want to do, right, because someone has already agreed that this is the right way to do it or that's the wrong way to do it. When there's no precedent, any of us, Rob, me, Ed, could be the expert setting that precedent in a court of law. That's how it works.
Well, so getting a consensus among industry on how to craft that story so the lawyers accept it is probably the approach there. But that's a definitely significant issue there.
Well, I want to be in on that. I want to listen to that court case when the lawyer tries to explain vMotion to a judge and jury.
That's a good one. Other questions? All right, I'm going to have to start asking my own here. Okay, we got another one back.
I'll do another one.
That's good.
How far out, as far as the V Shield, where they're talking about pulling the antivirus off of the VMs and putting it out on the system? You touched on HBSS, the mandate about HBSS now. I know that we're looking at doing a VDI proof of concept. Antivirus is one of the things that taxes our system the most, believe it or not, more than a lot of the C2 applications.
Right.
So, for us, it's a very exciting concept to be able to get the antivirus out of the operating system onto the hypervisor.
Right.
Next month.
Yeah, actually, we released our component yesterday, and Trend Micro is going to be out with their product here very shortly. And then it's a matter of, again, HBSS being McAfee or Intel or whatever you want to call them. Yeah. So basically, they at that point, we're working with them to try to get them on board as well, to try to get to that point. And that's happening here, but I don't know the time frame on that.
Well, as far as DISA, getting this up through to where we could even possibly get approval to use this instead of the host-based, antivirus. That whole food chain is the one that it's like, okay, is that 3 years? Is that 5 years?
Go ahead.
Yeah, mine's not much fact. I was going to say, once you get that done, let me know how that turns out.
One of the things I was talking to DISA about, and I brought this up with another branch of the military. I've done a lot of pen testing, a lot of red team work. I never had a perfect inventory, right? My target never knew all their systems, never knew all their access points, never knew all their services. I always broke in, almost always, on the service they didn't know about, the access point they weren't protecting, you know. And we talk about this with the hypervisor, right? It's infeasible for there to be a virtual machine that I don't know about, right? The hypervisor knows about all the virtual machines. I can work through the hypervisor privileges to not only know about all the virtual machines, know where they are, know them when they're off or on, what services are running, what packets are going. I can figure all of these things out. So that perfect inventory allows me to take like an HBSS solution, and if I'm running it through the hypervisor, I can be very confident that I'm checking every system, right? No gaps. And I think DISA is going to love that.
Not only that, I mean, think about it. This is why I say DISA needs to expand to more than just the hypervisor itself. It has to involve more and more of the ecosystem. More and more, basically, how many people here want to run only a single ESX server? Few of you.
Most people have clusters of 20 or 30 or more, right?
Yeah, but how many people are actually, does DISA give you a standard for the cluster? And it doesn't yet. VMware has tried to address that in their hardening guide. And if DISA accepts that, it'll go further. So that's good.
Another question. Cool.
For data at rest, is anyone looking at encrypting the SAN itself and possibly putting a hardware appliance between hypervisor and SAN so that you don't have a hypervisor hit, or even have to do per VM within the VM encryption?
Yeah, I mean, people are doing the virtual, VSAs, virtual SANs.
Virtual storage appliances.
Right, and doing the encryption in the hardware fabric. Right. And that was an encrypted LUN. And what I like about that is that even at hypervisor privilege, that's opaque traffic.
Yeah.
And that passes a data at rest, check mark?
Yeah, the data at rest is encrypted, yes.
Yeah, it will be. And there's the Brocade device. They have an encrypting fabric switch. There's decrew. There's a number of them that exist. The traffic from the hypervisor to that switch or to that device is unencrypted. But anything further and what's at rest is encrypted.
Yeah, and a lot of the storage manufacturers are coming out with data at rest encryption on the array as well. So everything on the array would be encrypted. So.
All right, so we're down to about 5 minutes. Other quick questions before we do our drawing.
So, I'll talk loud.
Okay, sir.
So basically, I've only got a couple weeks into the DoD world, and I want to know, can I run a virtual system that has a mix of secret and top secret?
Not yet. So the question was, can you run a virtual system with secret and top secret?
All right, so the question I have is, do a simulation that might discover a vulnerability which transitions a system from secret to top secret. So how would I handle that? Do I just have to have totally separate systems? Is there a way to solve it?
Maybe take the mic.
You make a good point. What's your answer?
Yeah. I mean, they can't even be in the same room. I mean, your SIPR, your top secret stuff has to be physically in a separate room. You can't have secret and top secret. A piece of tape down the floor is not going to work. The customer tried that, by the way. It has to physically be a separate room that has a separate. You can't have any of the same network devices in there. No cables could even go through there from your NIPR environment. I mean, the TS, the SIPR and NIPR enclave. I mean, in my experience anyway, with the Marine Corps and the Navy and even the Army, it's a completely physical separation. And there's no ifs, ands, buts.
And I like that answer, but I do know people are working on.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, as many of you probably know, is the HAP project, right? And the TVE from General Dynamics, for example, is a good example of that. So there's a workstation approach to that. There's nothing in the ESX side yet. So we'll leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, the point is we're not there yet, but we're working on it.
And you need multiple vCenters too, right? You can't have a cluster that's secret and a cluster that's not.
There's a whole list.
Yeah, if you talk about multi-level secure and compartmental mode workstations, remember those? I mean, this is a big problem, but they're trying to solve it. And there's some belief that between the things like the determinant technology and virtual machine monitors, right? That you can prove isolation between VMs, but that hypervisor is a connecting layer that can bridge those enclaves, and that's a no-no. So I think there's a lot of work being done to test that, and that's what high assurance is about.
Yeah, again, and it's a ways out. I mean, it's not like it's going to be tomorrow, but there's definitely work being done because we get a lot of interest, obviously, in that.
One of the other things you got to remember is that the guy that's the admin, he can see everything, the virtualization admin. So unless he has that top secret clearance, he can't even see that. You can't even be on that box as an admin, period. So it's just not a really good idea right now.
Right. So do we have the cards that were collected?
They're in the back.
Okay, let's go ahead and do a quick drawing. You do need to be present to win. By the way, we're not going to keep these cards for any kind of purposes other than to draw for this, so we'll probably just throw them out.
I was selling them
unless you want to come back and get your card. Be green about it. All right. Here, we got a nice big bowl here. All right, Edward, come up and pick for yours. Yeah.
Mauricio Botero. Come on up.
All right.
Real quick. Wrong one.